for what happens when couples experience disconnection in their relationship. What we know, and I keep saying, is disconnection and conflict is inevitable. We all have bad days, and knowing how to repair disconnection, knowing how to sort of get back in the boat after we fall out is really critical. But it involves understanding what is it that is going on in those moments. And couples really benefit from understanding and aligning together and basically understanding that the problem in their relationship is this negative cycle that happens when they start feeling disconnected, and that it's happening because they're so important to each other, because they're each other's person, and because they have a huge impact on each other. So I think that we can teach couples to really honor the incredible impact they have on their partner. And I think we underestimate how important we are sometimes, and how our behaviors and reactions truly do affect our partner in a really important way. So that's kind of the helpful part too, is once you're stepping into, this is like step 3, even like stage 1, we're starting to help couples understand what that cycle looks like for them. Like, so help me understand, if I was a fly on the wall and those moments when you're feeling disconnected, what does that look like? Like, what would I see? Because then you're going to be able to help them describe to you what happens. You know, the action tendencies. What do they do? What do they say? How do they act when they're disconnected? And it's not that it's always going to be the same, but usually there's one sort of predominant pattern. And that's where you start to flesh out kind of what their negative cycle might look like. And you're bringing in your awareness too of how they see themselves and how they see their partner. Okay. So we are helping couples start to see their pattern and honor the impact they're having on their partner, and that when they act a certain way, it affects their partner and then affects their partner's reaction. And that's why it's a loop that sort of feels like this spiral. It's very helpful when couples can align and start to recognize that there is no bad guy in the room. There is no one to blame. But the enemy to their connection is the way that they respond to each other when they're feeling disconnected. And they can even name that pattern to begin to kind of see it as something that's destructive to their relationship that happens in those moments. Because the first steps are they're going to begin to recognize, we don't want to do this anymore. But that's not enough, right? I mean, it's not about avoiding conflict. That's sort of like, if we can kind of understand that we don't want to get stuck in this cycle anymore, then how do we express our needs and feelings in those moments? And that's where we want to take couples to greater levels of depth and vulnerability, awareness of their needs, so that when your partner's not responding to you, instead of becoming hostile and critical, you can say something like, I start feeling really alone when, you're not there for me. Or when I don't hear from you, I start feeling like I'm not important. It's like a little bit different, that kind of communication. And then we learn how to be responsive to that. So that's where we're trying to, if couples, it's the reach, risk, respond. So in those moments when I'm feeling disconnected, can I express that need? Can I take that risk and trust you will be responsive? Right? And so if that's not happening, then some other negative strategy is being used to fight for that connection. So the 3 patterns that are most common, Sue Johnson talks about as being find the bad guy, be the protest polka, which is the pursue, withdraw pattern, or freeze and flee. So again, I find that there's a predominant pattern for most couples. You will see 80% of couples that are coming in are going to be caught in the protest polka. That's the dance they're doing, and it's pursue, withdraw. So when I teach you the negative cycle, and all the kind of worksheets you see out there are going to kind of look at this pursue, withdraw pattern. But you will inevitably have couples that are essentially withdraw, withdraw, and that's the freeze and flee, really disconnected. That usually starts coming once they get the burned out pursuer. Maybe for years they've been the pursuer, and then essentially they've just given up and they've detached, disconnected, and they've been sort of in a protective mode. So then you have couples that just are really disconnected and probably not having a lot of conflict, but not much meaningful emotional connection. The find the bad guy is usually the really escalated couple. So I'll go over that really quickly, because that's really challenging. I sometimes feel like when I'm sitting with a couple that's caught in this find the bad guy, blame each other, they're really caught in content. They get really stuck in expressing what the other person did that justifies, their anger. They feel really trapped in it. And it feels pretty regressive as a therapist, as if you're sitting with, I for whatever this might sound like, sometimes it feels like managing children, as the mother that's doing that in my own house, right? It's like, whoa. So these are situations where you feel like there's a lot of escalation, and it can feel really overwhelming as a therapist to know how to kind of create safety in the room. And that's where you might get quite directive. It can be helpful to let couples get into their cycle initially, because you want to observe and see what happens. But then you might sort of really start to regulate. I think we're seeing your cycle. I think I'm seeing what's happening at home. I really want to slow things down. Things are happening really quickly. So that's where I think both of you, your confidence at being directive comes into play and is very important, because you are starting to regulate the emotion in the room by your own presence and ability to slow down. You don't want to get caught up into that. And you're going to have to repeat that many times. But we'll talk about what to do in these situations. It's really effective when you just validate those secondary emotion. Of course you're angry. Sure, right? We're going to validate that. But I won't get too much caught in intervention, and more just identifying these patterns. So freeze and flee, mutual withdrawal. Like I said, usually this appears as a pattern after, the kind of pursuer is burned out. They might experience living parallel lives. It's a pretty scary place to be in. They feel really detached, usually pretty hopeless. I see this a fair amount with some older couples that have been married for decades. So they're experiencing kind of mutual withdrawal, and there's not a lot of trust, not a lot of bonding, not a lot of awareness of how to be responsive and attuned to each other's needs, because nothing's getting expressed. What's most common is the protest polka, and so that's where we are seeing that fight or flight dynamic, where that fighting for connection looks like a pursuer who is, I'll go to the slide that talks about pursuers. Pursuers are kind of experiencing feeling shut out. Maybe they're not important, that their feelings don't matter. I feel so lonely in this relationship. It'd be better off being alone than feeling lonely with you. I'm by myself, I'm dismissed, I don't get a response. Maybe I turn up the volume because I really need, the only way I know I'm important to you is when you finally start yelling back at me, right? Because I'm pushing so hard. It's like I have to bang down the door to even get through to you. And so there's a lot of if you ask about that fly on the wall, what does it look like? You're going to see that person is going to get escalated, angry, hostile, and critical. And underneath that, you're going to start accessing those primary feelings of, I don't, the attributions they're making are, I'm not important, I don't matter. And I'm afraid you aren't going to be there for me. Withdrawers are often feeling like I can never get it right. No matter what I do, I just can't please. I try to fix things, it doesn't work. I give up. The kind of visceral experience might be one of numbness, like I just don't feel anything in those moments. Those protective strategies might actually be aimed at, like, I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to fight. I just want to keep things calm. Fears of failing are kind of being activated, or that withdrawer might feel a little paralyzed and not know how to respond in those moments. Kind of that person that sort of goes behind their wall as a protective strategy is what we see with withdrawers. What you see a lot in EFT, because the first part is helping couples understand their negative cycle. And this is basically a diagram that I'm sure is so overwhelming as you're trying to make sense of this. So I'll walk you through it. But on the left, I think actually, I'm not sure. I haven't used these features here. Oh, maybe I won't try to do that right now, but I think I can draw on this. I'll figure that out later. Anyway, you see the pursuer column and you see a withdrawer column. And what I actually want to bring your attention to right now is just the line that goes across the page, because that is really important. That's above the line is everything we can see and observe. And it's pretty much everything that the couple is coming in aware of. So it's their behavior. It's what happens when they get disconnected, is what do they do? What are their action tendencies? It's their perceptions and attributions. It's what's the story they're telling themselves about their partner's feelings about them. And then it's their awareness of their emotion. And that's the secondary emotion. That's the emotion they're expressing and they're feeling most reactively. So we're just going to stay above the line right now, because that's what you're going to see. And that's what you're kind of assessing for, is like what happens in those moments of disconnection. The pursuer is the one that's kind of in the fight or flight, and they're fighting for connection. But if you're a fly on the wall, they look critical and attacking. They're the one usually getting escalated. They're way more verbal, and they probably think they're being vulnerable, because some people equate vulnerability with tears, but that's expressiveness, right? So vulnerability is not the same thing as expressiveness. In order to be vulnerable, we got to go below the line, because anything above the line isn't really vulnerability. So when a pursuer feels disconnected and they start criticizing their partner, what's happening is it's activating attachment fears below the line. So you go from, this is what it's like an infinity symbol, right? Because if I criticize an attack, how come you didn't call me back? How many times have I told you to call me if you're going to be late? I'm triggering my partner's fear of failing. I got it wrong again. I just can't please. I feel like I'm not enough. So, but what my partner is going to say they're experiencing, and if we go above the line, frustration. Oh, here we go again. You're so demanding, right? So that might be where this conversation is going. You're so demanding. I'm 10 minutes late. You're being ridiculous. Or you're so demanding. Or I'm just going to walk out of the room because I don't want to be in conflict, right? That's a withdrawer. So like the behavior is like kind of shut down, avoid. And now that's going to activate the pursuer's fear, primary emotion. This, you'd be surprised how this fits so well for so many people, right? Fear of abandonment. I'm not important to you. I don't feel like I matter. But instead of expressing that, I'm angry and I'm telling myself I'm not important. And so I'm working really hard for my partner to understand me by telling him what he's doing wrong. I guess I'm speaking from the first person thinking, but anyway, the idea being that's kind of what that negative cycle looks like. So when couples come in, you're already trying to understand from, this framework, what happens when they get disconnected? What is the behavior for each person? What is the story they're telling themselves? And what feeling can they access in the moment? That's all above the line stuff. And it's going to be pretty raw and pretty right out there. You don't have to dig too far to see this. What you know that they don't know is what's happening below the line. And a lot of the work of EFT is helping couples first understand the cycle they're in, that the cycle's the enemy to their relationship. It creates problems and they can't get connected when they're stuck above the line. But that when they can learn how to express their needs and longings and be responsive to each other, they really create a very different kind of emotional experience. And that is the model for secure relationship, for secure bond. And we're not, my view is like, we're helping couples have new experience of each other in the session. That's why we're not just going to teach them this. That wouldn't change anything. They actually have to turn to each other. And so we'll talk about kind of the 5 basic moves of an EFT therapist, where we're creating enactments. We're really choreographing a different sort of experience, a different kind of conversation between the couples as we move through the steps and stages of EFT. Because many people are not even aware of their attachment needs and longings, right? So we're going to do some work to tap into those raw spots and kind of access what are those usually unmet needs and fears that get activated in times of disconnection. And they usually make sense when you know the attachment history, which is why I like those initial assessment interviews become really important. And you want to get as much history as you can about their attachment relationships and coping strategies and who they turn to for comfort, because it really helps you as the therapist conceptualize what their raw spots are and how those get activated on a deeper level. And then how they can really learn how to turn to their partner to be responsive to them. And essentially then they get the kind of very healing relationship, which my view is like, we're helping their relationship, but ultimately we're helping 2 individuals feel like they could be their best self because they feel securely connected. But when we get down to those unmet attachment needs, it's universal, right? What we all need and long for is to be loved and to feel important. And so this kind of helps you understand how when our attachment fears and needs get activated, we're actually getting caught up here, as if you can see where I'm pointing, but we're actually getting caught above the line. So couples are learning how to kind of come below the line. So let's do what questions about this? I want to know if it makes sense to you, if it feels a little bit like overwhelming, or what are your responses?
I caught myself wondering, so you said that this is the most common by far.
Yeah.
How individuals, like, how does it happen that those with a fear of abandonment tend to end up with those with a fear of failing? Or does that kind of develop over time based on their personalities or the relationship dynamic? Or is that just what seems to happen, that those are the people who end up pairing?
Well, I can say that in a heterosexual relationship, what we find is that 80% of the time the withdrawer is the male partner and the pursuer is a female partner. So that's partly an answer to your question. That's not always the case. Of course, you see sometimes a pattern even in a heterosexual relationship where the withdrawer is the female and the pursuer is the male. When I do intensives and I'm working with a heterosexual couple and the male partner, I find the most access I have to their emotion is when I mean, this is just interesting. I dive, I dip a little bit into their relationship with their father. And what's so interesting is this feeling like dad, never really was proud of me. I mean, it's just interesting. There's this unmet attachment need, this fear of failing. And there's some interesting books that look at the neuropsychology of men and women. And I mean, we're always making sweeping generalizations when we go there. But I think there's a lot to be said for men with the sense of kind of shame that can get tapped around feelings of inadequacy, not being enough. And that might come largely from the way in which men and women are socialized differently, expectations of gender roles. So I think part of it lies in that gender differences rather than this kind of seeking partners that activate our raw spots. And any partner is going to activate your raw spot, regardless of what that is, because they're so important, because they're your person. So there is no, so the idea that there's a different partner out there who's going to make you, um, who's not going to tap that stuff for you just doesn't really jive with attachment theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this, where a lot of couples go is, well, this, I just can't be with this person. Well, the reality is if that's a raw spot that will get rubbed in other relationships, regardless of who that person is. It's just what happens. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. It's interesting you found a pattern with male withdrawers. Have you found any patterns with female pursuers in terms of their upbringing?
Well, I think that if we're just looking at this, it's so interesting how people, once you deliver this, they're resonating so strongly with the cycle. But, if we think about how girls and women are socialized, like, um, I don't know if I want to put this in a gendered context because I usually think about it in terms of attachment style. Um,
Well, that's fine. Is there, like, I'm assuming there's a specific attachment style that's associated with fear of abandonment, probably the anxious one.
well, anxious, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think even securely attached people I mean, they're going to have the same attachment fears. What's going to look different is they're less likely to get stuck in a negative cycle because they might have the tools and resources to do some of that below the line work on their own, right? It's being
Mm-hmm.
modeled for them. They know how to express their needs. They can kind of repair a lot better without the help of a couples therapist. So the idea that we all have attachment fears and anxieties, we all have raw spots. I mean, that's uh, different than looking at attachment styles. But but definitely when we have those anxious attachment styles, um, we can really get more sensitive to that, you know, influence of our partner in those moments of disconnection. And if it's a really insecure attachment style, we're going to see like hypersensitivity to signs of rejection. So then, you might see some of that as well. I'm going to show you a video that I actually always use in my intensives, and it just is like very simple way of describing negative cycles and what happens. And I like it a lot. And I want to share it with you. And then we'll talk a little bit about it. But it really does a nice job of laying it out.
This is the story of how true love can go awry and the first step to mending it and making it stronger than ever. We have to get away from what you argue about and look at how you disagree.
Seeing the video.
Most people get into a rigid pattern that takes them over. We call that the cycle because it goes around and around. Well, look at how the cycle gets between you and your partner and makes you think your partner doesn't care. We come together to fight the true enemy, which is the cycle. This starts the journey to a secure and lasting bond. Meet Wallace and Pat. This is their story. It might be a little like yours. Maybe you're more like Wallace or more like Pat or a mix of the two. Wallace and Pat meet and fall in love. They hope to be understood, be first in each other's hearts.
Okay. Keep. All right, let's try this again. There's a button that says optimize for video. So I clicked that button and we're going to see if that helps. Okay. And just tell me if you can't see it. Are you seeing now what looks like YouTube? All right, I'm going to try to enlarge the window. Are you seeing it now? Okay. I'm really getting better with Zoom.
The cycle gets between you and your partner and makes you think your partner doesn't care. We come together to fight the true enemy, which is the cycle. This starts the journey to a secure and lasting bond. Meet Wallace and Pat. This is their story. It might be a little like yours. Maybe you're more like Wallace or more like Pat or a mix of the two. Wallace and Pat meet and fall in love. They hope to be understood, be first in each other's hearts, comfort each other in sad times, have good times together, and most of all, they plan to live happily ever after. They make a home and build their life together, adding one thing after another, and the stress starts to pile up. They each notice the other seems far away, and they can't seem to talk without arguing. They each feel misunderstood, frustrated, lonely, and wonder if they really matter to the other one. Pat tries to get Wallace's attention, but Wallace withdraws, trying not to argue. Pat tries harder, speaks louder, tells Wallace just what to do differently, and Wallace freezes, trying not to do the wrong thing. Pat pursues, explaining again, and Wallace is getting frustrated and angry. Finally, Wallace disappears inside or to other things. Pat is left wondering what happened, and away they go into the whirlwind of fighting and distance. These moves go by so fast, it's really hard to tell what's going on. To help us understand, let's look at 2 bits of love science. Number 1 is the emotional center of the brain. It's a very old part of the nervous system and treats the potential loss of your happy home life as a code red emergency. It gets your body ready for fight or flight and shuts down unnecessary functions like rational thought. The second comes from Newton's third law of motion. You know, the one about for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So back to Wallace and Pat. It makes sense that they think the problem is the other person. But this is called find the bad guy, and it's a lose-lose proposition. Either you are the bad guy or you are with a bad guy, and who wants that? Yet both Wallace and Pat make sense in their own ways. Let's look at them one at a time. First, Pat. When Pat feels far away from Wallace or they're fighting, Pat fears being alone, unimportant, invisible, helpless. And because of that, Pat feels sad or lonely, frustrated, irritated, angry. All this creates the fight or flight response. Pat wants Wallace to come closer, but what Pat says sounds like demands or criticisms. So Wallace sees Pat saying, "You're always gone. You never listen to me. I have to do everything by myself. I can't get through to you. You just don't care." But Pat has longings and softer feelings under this protest, like, "I miss you. I want to know I matter to you. I want to be a full partner. I can't find you. I want to be loved by you." Saying these kinds of things is hard because Pat doesn't know whether Wallace will respond lovingly, and Pat may be right about that. So let's look at Wallace. When Wallace feels far away from Pat or they're fighting, Wallace fears being inadequate, misunderstood, helpless. And because of that, Wallace feels sad or numb, frustrated, irritated, angry. Again, a fight or flight response. So, of course, Wallace wants the conflict to end, but what Wallace does seems like abandonment to Pat. This is what Pat sees. Wallace may freeze, saying nothing, or make empty promises like "I'll try to do better," or disappear. Wallace may build a wall and go behind it. Wallace might get defensive. "I didn't mean it that way. What do you want from me? I can never get it right for you." Wallace has longings and softer feelings under the protest too. When Wallace freezes, it means, "I don't know what to say. I want to do the right thing for you. I don't want to fight. It'll only make things worse. I am overwhelmed and need to feel safe." Wallace's defensiveness really means, "Please accept me. I want to know you love me. I don't know what to do. I feel sad and lonely." It's also hard for Wallace to say all these kinds of things, and for the same reason, and Wallace may be right about that. Okay, so now we can put the two of them together. It's an endless loop, sometimes called a pattern or dance or cycle. You can start with Pat. Pat feels Wallace is far away and reacts with alarm because Wallace is so important and protests trying to get Wallace closer. Wallace feels criticized because Pat is so important, also reacts with alarm and protests by withdrawing further. Pat sees the withdrawing and reacts more and pursues even harder. Notice, the longings and softer emotions never get seen. It's the same if you start with Wallace. Wallace feels bad, reacts because Pat is important, and protests to stop the conflict by withdrawing. Pat sees that and reacts to Wallace's distance, and on and on. Either way, the longings and softer emotions never get seen. Looking at the cycle this way, you can see how one affects the other, and the whole thing happens because they are so important to each other. The alarm gets so high that the cycle goes out of control. Here's where the science comes in. The red alert emergency in the brain makes the cycle fast, and the reactions make it strong. When we look at the steps one by one in a safe environment like therapy, the emotional brain calms down, fight or flight hormones ebb, and the thinking brain can come back online. This slows the action of the cycle, and they can start to separate from it. Now there's a possibility for new responses and reactions. They learn to recognize the cycle as the enemy, that endless loop of action and reaction that keeps them in misery. Coming together against the cycle means blaming the cycle and not each other, and that makes it smaller and slower and helps them feel calmer and more open to each other. Now Wallace and Pat can see and touch the longings and softer emotions they each have. They start to see each other in new ways, and they can understand and calm reactive emotions like anger. This is not the end of the story. Taming the cycle is a big milestone toward a lasting, secure connection. Wallace and Pat will form new, deeper, and more secure bonds that will help them stay with their vulnerable feelings. A new positive pattern can develop. When they see each other's vulnerable emotions, they can understand and reach for each other for comfort and celebration, and all that is made possible by first taming the cycle. Do you see yourself or your partner in Pat or Wallace?
Okay. I love the simplicity of that. And it just kind of reviewed everything we just talked about. Is it starting to like make good theoretical sense now?
Yeah, this definitely helps like organize it. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it can feel like I said, sometimes the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, because it's comforting to at the first level of really feeling like as a therapist, we want to understand what's going on in the room. Because there's nothing more overwhelming than sitting with a couple and feeling like everything's coming at you and it's intense and you just are lost in it. Um, but if you understand what's going on in the room, you'll be less reactive to it and then be able to kind of pull back and feel confident that you can just you know how to sort of help regulate. But I do want to move into talking a little bit about um, just some of the key interventions that EFT therapists use, and what it kind of looks like when you observe EFT therapists. I think you'll benefit a lot from starting to dive into those videos. And Sue Jorgensen is the main therapist that talks about some of the skills. You're free to watch more of that too, because it's a 10-hour series that ISEFT put out as a training for EFT therapists. Um, but there's a certain quality in how EFT therapists, show up in their sessions. I am skipping a little bit of this that I think is repetitive, just also in the interests of time. But reviewing some of the core assumptions, right? So in emotionally focused therapy, where we are conceptualizing and understanding that a couple is coming in stuck in a negative cycle that's really stemming from their reactive tendencies. And it's like, the way they're managing their distress and anxiety is actually creating distress and anxiety in their partner, and it's going back and forth in that negative loop. And that those kind of habitual ways of responding. And if you do a little bit of insight oriented work in those assessment sessions, you might help the individual recognize that a lot of their patterns come from pretty adaptive tendencies, like from growing up in an environment where their needs weren't being met. They might have found it ways to kind of survive those situations, right? By like withdrawing or seeking kind of comfort on their own or whatever that looked like. But what happens is what's adaptive when we're young can become maladaptive as adults. And so those strategies they use to manage anxiety and distress and disconnection aren't working for them anymore. And it's where they need to relearn how to get their needs met by being, willingness to be vulnerable and like learning how to trust their partner is going to show up for them, especially when they haven't experienced that in their early formative relationships. Agent of change is emotion. That is the agent of change. It's vulnerability and emotional responsiveness. That's kind of where the map is taking us. Um, and how do we get clients to go kind of to the basement of their own emotional experience? How do we bring them there and also trust the partner is going to be responsive? And so we take baby steps toward getting there. Um, And we're understanding that we're really orchestrating these new emotional experiences, and we can call them conversations, right? You're helping the couple have a very different kind of conversation that is modeling a secure bond. So what does an EFT therapist do? Definitely it's client-centered, humanistic, experiential. So, showing up, you're showing up as a process facilitator. And I think importantly, a safe, secure, temporary attachment figure. So you're really holding space. And I think about mirror neurons, right? And how you can help regulate some emotion in the room by your own tone and the speed. So we go slow. We really try to slow things down so we're not kind of getting hijacked by emotion in the session. So I'll talk about some of that, but client-centered. So all those basic counseling skills from your very first way of being with clients really come back into play in terms of reflection, evocative questioning, using the client's words, keeping things really simple. So take comfort in that, right? We're going back to our basic therapeutic presence when we're showing up in the room with the couples. Meeting clients where they are, meet the couple where they are. We're not going to try to go too fast. There's a lot to be said about validating secondary emotion. They want to feel understood. They want to feel like you understand their anger or their kind of withdrawal. So, validating that will help them feel like you really are understanding them. We don't coach and teach, that can be really hard. And I mentioned like something I struggled with is wanting to share the model. I think there's often a lot of questions. Is it beneficial to talk to couples about the model you're using? I think that ultimately, regardless of how you do that, what's beneficial about it is you want the couple to feel confident that they're getting the help they need. But if they feel confident they're getting the help they need, they don't necessarily they're not necessarily going to take in a lot of psychoeducational information in that session. So if you can trust that the model's helpful to you and is experiential, the one thing you might benefit from is there's lots of blank worksheets where you can really work through the cycle with a couple. Sometimes people are comfortable using whiteboards or paper. I do a lot less of that in an overt way. But in my intensives, I really think that video is helpful for couples after they understand their cycle and they're starting to articulate things that way. Anything we do to repeat and solidify, because you want them to really start speaking about, that cycle. And the other thing is sort of the pathologizing or diagnosis, which is part of why my practice, we don't provide a clinical disorder in the treatment for couples. We give it a Z code, which is relationship distress. I really see our role as treating the relationship rather than treating a clinical diagnosis. So, and that attachment theory really supports that what's happening is understandable and predictable because of their attachment needs, not because of their anxiety or depression. Once you weave in, trauma reactions, things might start looking different, but the underpinnings are the same in terms of attachment theory. Any questions so far?
No, I don't see like this, like the PowerPoint. I don't
know. I'm so sorry. Yeah, hang on. I might have to go back and re-click the video. All right, let's do that. You guys can interrupt me, by the way. And it's good to get good at interrupting, because that's something we do a lot in couples counseling. And usually I just tell clients, I interrupt a lot. That's part of what I do in here. So now do you see that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so then view slideshow from here. All right, I went right back to the beginning. Well, I'm just going to click through these for fear that actually, it's taking too long. Usually if you're on the slide you want, view. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to go back to the first slide again.
If you do it from up, oh.
Yes, tell me.
If you do it, the tab along the white top that says slideshow, go to your right where it actually says slideshow. It has a menu.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, but now I got to get down to that slide. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I knew it was somewhere. Good. Thank you. So what is it? 3 principles to guide any intervention. We have 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes. Maintaining the alliance. You know, I said, you know, you're the temporary attachment figure, so couples will be directing a lot of their feelings toward you. It's safe, they can express that to you. So we're trying to tune in and be very present moment, process oriented with each person. Obviously, like organizing and reframing. So the more you can already from the very beginning use an attachment framework, you'll notice even in that cycle video, it happens because you're so important to each other, right? It's like we're using the attachment frame. We're bringing them into that understanding of why this is happening, that they're so important to each other, that it's really painful to feel disconnected from your person. And so helping them recognize that, reframing things in that way is something that we're doing. And then trying, you know, to use our skills to basically restructure their interactions so that they're below the line, right? We want them to learn how to express their attachment needs and longings. And I'll talk, we're going to throughout the year touch on all these kind of skills and techniques, and you're going to see these coming through in the sessions. And when you watch videos, you might benefit from having this list and looking for examples of therapists using these different interventions. A lot of these are coming straight out of humanistic kind of Rogerian therapy of really strong presence, deepening emotional experience, validation, reflection, using clients' words. The acronym RISSSC, RISSSC, to me, like before, you know, a session, you know, we're thinking, how are we bringing EFT into the room? Like repeating back the client's words, using the imagery that the client's bringing in, simple, reflective interventions, slow pacing. You can tell even when I'm talking about this, the tone and pacing is slower than what we might show up with in individual therapy. Part of that is trying to regulate the emotion in the room. And part of it is really the need to create and slow things down for the couple, and to deepen their emotional experience. You'll notice that EFT therapists, especially Sue Johnson, they're in chairs with wheels because they will really lean in quite close, like almost seated between the couple. Sue is sort of noted for using a lot of touch in her work, which comes up in discussions around male EFT therapists feeling reluctant and how is that perceived. again, we're trying to regulate emotion, and there be maybe one way that that happens. I think like soft, slow, and low. That's kind of how we're showing up when we're doing the EFT work. Soft, slow, and low. And you're going to notice that when you're watching the videos. So we're remembering that agent of change, safe emotional engagement is the only solution. That's where we're going with every single couple. Content, we can kind of revisit difficult conversations, difficult decisions, recurring conflicts. The idea is once they learn how to express their kind of more vulnerable feelings, they can have difficult conversations. But our work isn't content focused. So if you find yourself, having a session that's about a disagreement and you're getting into the content, try to pull out of that. And it's okay to say, our work here really isn't about coming up with resolution to this big decision. It's about helping you know what's going on for you that's making it hard to have these kinds of conversations. So let's slow down a minute and kind of understand like what's happening for you when he is telling you no, like he doesn't want to go visit your parents or something, right? So we're going to try to bring it back to the process of awareness of almost like also visceral body awareness of what's happening for them in those moments. And they will catch on pretty quickly that that's what the important thing is. I'm going to introduce you to something that is like really important in terms of what EFT therapy looks like and what the therapist is doing almost from the first session. And I mean, like after the assessment. And it's called the EFT tango because Sue Johnson likes to use this metaphor of the dance, right? That, we're trying to change the music, which is the emotional tone and depth of a relationship, not just the steps, but she calls this the EFT tango. So there are 5 steps that kind of get repeated throughout the session. And it aligns with the idea that a lot of the work we do is setting up and facilitating what we call enactments. Enactments are just really conversations that the couple is having with each other that we are guiding and facilitating. And we're trying to kind of deepen their ability to be vulnerable and responsive. But you can imagine that, we really have to take steps in that direction to ensure that it's going to go well because we want a successful enactment. We want a new emotional experience, a healing one. So this is you can sort of ignore what's on the left because that's not as relevant as just looking at these kind of phases of an enactment. So the first thing is saying mirroring and reflecting present process. So if I'm kind of taking you into an example of, I'm trying to think of something simple, like we'll go back to the example of what it feels like to a female partner when the male partner isn't kind of responding to her when she's trying to connect. So you would want to try to, so help me understand this. What happens for you in those moments when he's not texting you back and he's late? What happens for you? It sounds like you get worried, and this is like that humanistic. I'm trying to understand your emotional experience. And I'm probably going to do some conjecture around that because I already know what's probably going on from an attachment frame, but I'm going to trust the client's experience. I want to use their words Yeah, so you get really frustrated and a little like, how do you feel that in your body? So I'm going to try to pull for the deepening of their emotional experience. And then that's sort of the step two, right? So it's like kind of scary. And you start feeling like you wonder, maybe feeling like you're not important, maybe feeling a little like unsure. Um, so I'm just deepening. And then, so what would it be like to share that with Tom? Do you think Tom knows that what's going on for you is you're not feeling important? You know, what would it be like to share that with him? That's meta, right? I'm asking you what it would be like to share that with Tom. I'm also wanting to know as a therapist that is it okay for her to share that with Tom right now, or is Tom going to get defensive? Is Tom not going to respond in a way that's healing, right? So I'm kind of trying to orchestrate an enactment. Ultimately, what I want is, can you turn to Tom and tell him what happens for you, what that feels like when he doesn't respond? Can you just turn to him? Do that early in your work because you're setting norms. It's uncomfortable for people. There's going to be some resistance and discomfort. My clients say it feels like, somebody once said, oh my God, it's like sandpaper. But I've had people say it's like going to a personal trainer and it's like you really don't want to do something, but you know that it's good for you. Some people will lean into it and kind of turn to their partner, but it's kind of scary. And you can process that. If they feel like they can't do it, it's okay, slice it thinner. This is really hard. Can you turn to Tom and tell him how hard it is for you to express your feelings like this? So I'm actually starting an enactment, and now I want to process, what was that like? What did that feel like to tell Tom? Tom, what was that like to hear Sally tell you about what she was feeling? Was that different? And now I want to kind of tie it in a bow and be like, that was really different. And sometimes I'm more exaggerative, like, that felt so different. You guys did such a beautiful job. Whoa. Like this is a different way of talking about what you're feeling. And I don't care how old you are or what you do professionally. It feels really good for your therapist to tell you you're doing a good job. So don't hesitate to just be like, that was beautiful. And you will spontaneously feel that at times. Like, it really is. It's like a beautiful thing to witness somebody. So that's the EFT tango that we're trying to kind of deepen, kind of organize, move the client to expressing something. It's going to start out like not too scary, but we're going to deepen through the work. And then we're going to start it again. Tom, with Tom sharing. And then we're going to do more deeper processing of what was that like for you and each. So it's like, does that make sense? Super introductory, but you're getting a sense of what I mean by enactments, and you're getting a little picture of what it looks like for a therapist to essentially choreograph a new conversation that sets up a new kind of emotional experience. What's in this, I will share these slides with you, and I shared a couple other videos that you might want to watch. One is demonstration of the tango. That's actually a therapist with two stuffed animals, but she's just taking them through what that process might look like. And then before it, the video here is Sue Johnson, also talking about the EFT tango and just describing a couple example and how she would work with them. So this is still like didactic, but I think going to be